Augusto Pinochet, born on November 25, 1915, in Valparaiso, Chile, rose to infamy as the leader of the military junta that overthrew Chile's socialist President Salvador Allende on September 11, 1973. Pinochet's rise to power marked the beginning of a brutal military dictatorship that lasted from 1974 to 1990. Throughout his reign, tens of thousands of Chileans who opposed his regime were subjected to horrific torture, and many lost their lives. His rule was a period of intense repression and fear, but also a time of controversial economic changes that shaped Chile's future. Despite the atrocities committed under his leadership, Pinochet remained a highly divisive figure in both Chile and around the world. His death on December 10, 2006, in Santiago, marked the end of a dark chapter in Chile's history, but the legacy of his dictatorship continues to stir debate and reflection to this day. Pinochet, a graduate of the prestigious military academy in Santiago in 1936, was a career military officer who had been appointed as Army Commander-in-Chief by President Salvador Allende just 18 days before the coup. This was a move that set the stage for the power grab he would later lead. Pinochet masterminded and executed the violent coup that overthrew Allende's government, taking control as head of the victorious military junta's governing council. Once in power, he wasted no time in crushing Chile's liberal opposition. In the first 3 years of his regime, around 130,000 people were arrested, and many of them suffered brutal torture. By June 1974, Pinochet consolidated all power into his hands when he declared himself president, pushing the rest of the junta members into mere advisory roles. His grip on power was now absolute. Pinochet was relentless in his mission to wipe out leftism in Chile and bring free market policies back to the nation's economy. Under his brutal regime, the junta faced widespread international condemnation for its severe suppression of dissent. However, despite the human rights abuses, Pinochet's reversal of the socialist policies put in place by the Allende government did have some economic results. Between 1976 and 1979, Chile saw a significant economic boom, with a notable drop in inflation. In 1978, Pinochet took a step toward modest political liberalization. He announced that a plebiscite had shown that 75% of the electorate supported his rule, a move that seemed to validate his grip on power. In March 1981, Pinochet pushed through a new constitution that allowed him to remain president for an 8-year term, which would last until 1989. At that point, a national referendum would decide whether he could serve another 8 years. During the 1980s, Pinochet's free market policies were credited with keeping inflation low and achieving steady economic growth, even though the country suffered through a severe recession between 1980 and 1983. While Pinochet allowed no meaningful political opposition, he still fulfilled his constitutional duty to hold the scheduled plebiscite. This plebiscite, which took place in October 1988, came earlier than expected. The result was a clear no vote of 55%, rejecting his rule, against a yes vote of 43%. Even though the electorate rejected his continued leadership, Pinochet stayed in office until March 11, 1990, when free elections brought in a new president, Christian Democrat Patricio Aylwin. Pinochet remained commander of the armed forces until 1998, and during this time, he often blocked efforts to prosecute security forces for human rights violations. After stepping down from the presidency, he became a senator for life, a position granted to former presidents under the 1981 Constitution. But in 1998, while visiting London, Pinochet's past caught up with him. He was arrested by British authorities after Spain requested his extradition for the torture of Spanish citizens during his regime. This unprecedented case sparked global controversy and ignited human rights organizations in Chile. The event prompted the United States and other nations to release once classified documents about Chileans who had disappeared, individuals kidnapped and likely killed by Pinochet's regime. These revelations shed light on horrific operations like Operation Colombo, where more than 100 leftist Chileans vanished in 1975, and Operation Condor, a coordinated effort by South American military governments to eliminate political opponents in the 1970s and 1980s. In January 2000, a British court ruled that Pinochet was too physically unfit to stand trial, allowing him to return to Chile. Despite this, he continued to face investigations by Chilean authorities. In 2000, Pinochet lost the immunity from prosecution he had enjoyed as a former president and was ordered to stand trial for human rights abuses. In Chile, immunity can be lifted on a case-by-case basis, and this marked a turning point in his legal battles. However, in 2002, the charges were dropped when Chile's Supreme Court ruled that Pinochet was mentally unfit to defend himself in court. Not long after, Pinochet resigned from his position as a senator for life. In 2004, the National Commission on Political Imprisonment and Torture released a report confirming more than 35,000 cases of torture during his regime. Then in 2005, the Chilean Supreme Court voted to lift Pinochet's immunity in relation to illegal financial dealings and for the disappearance and execution of at least 119 political dissidents whose bodies were found in Argentina in 1975. He was deemed fit to stand trial for these crimes. Despite all these developments, Pinochet died in 2006 without ever being tried for the countless human rights abuses that occurred under his rule. Chile, located along the western coast of South America, stretches about 2,700 miles, 4,300 kilometers, from its northern border with Peru to the southern tip of the continent at Cape Horn, a long and narrow country. Chile is bordered by Peru and Bolivia to the north, Argentina to the east, and the Pacific Ocean to the west. Like many Latin American nations, Chile was colonized by Spain, and its culture has deep Spanish roots. However, there has been a growing appreciation for the influence of indigenous cultures in the country. Throughout its history, Chile has generally maintained a representative democratic government, which is a rare achievement in Latin America. While the country faced a significant break from democracy, with a military junta that ruled from 1973 to 1990, it has otherwise avoided the frequent coups and constitutional disruptions that plagued many of its neighbors. When the Spanish arrived in Chile in the mid-16th century, the region was home to at least 500,000 indigenous people. These various tribes shared a common language, but had no central government. The groups in northern Chile survived by fishing and farming in the oases. During the 15th century, they came under the influence of expanding civilizations from Peru, first the Chincha and then the Quechua, who were part of the vast Inca Empire. Although these invaders tried to conquer central and southern Chile, they were unsuccessful. In the southern part of Chile, the Araucanian peoples lived in small family clusters and villages. Most of them thrived through hunting, gathering, fishing, trading, and warring, though some engaged in subsistence farming. The Araucanians were known for their fierce resistance, first against the Incas and later against the Spanish. Unfortunately, the arrival of Europeans brought violence and disease, which decimated their population by 2/3 within the first century of contact. The Spanish conquest of Chile began in 1536–37, when Diego de Almagro, a rival of Francisco Pizarro, led an expedition southward in search of an otro Peru or another Peru. However, Almagro's men found no great civilization or gold, and they quickly returned to Peru. This disappointing outcome delayed further attempts at conquest until 1540–41. After Almagro's death, Pizarro granted Pedro de Valdivia the license to conquer and colonize the region. Valdivia, accompanied by about 150 men, including his mistress Inés Suárez, the only Spanish woman in the group, entered Chile in late 1540. On February 12, 1541, Valdivia founded Santiago, marking the beginning of Spanish settlement. For the next 2 decades, the settlers faced constant threats from indigenous people who fiercely resisted enslavement. To secure the colony's safety, the Spanish divided land among the conquerors, which led to the creation of large estates. This system was later formalized through the mayorazgo, a practice that allowed estates to be passed down through generations.